Welcome to our event. My name is Professor Ann Karagosian. I'm the director of the UCLA Promise Armenian Institute, and it is my privilege to welcome you to this actually last PAI hosted event for the academic year. We are honored to have an in-person lecture, which is simultaneously on Zoom and YouTube, entitled Medieval Knowledge in Medieval Times in the Mediterranean, an example of the Kingdom of Cilician Armenia. This is to be delivered by Dr. Zohrab Gevorgyan, who is an adjunct lecturer in the Department of History at the American University of Armenia and is currently a Fulbright visiting scholar here at UCLA. So we're delighted to have you here, Zohrab. His lecture will discuss transformations of spatial and temporal perception, communications, and material capital in the Mediterranean environment during the 12th to 14th centuries, with a focus on the Kingdom of Cilician Armenia during this period. We are grateful to Dr. Gevorgyan for offering to provide this relatively short stay at UCLA. I am joined in my welcome today by Professor Sebu Aslanyan, who will introduce our speaker in more detail shortly. I'm also pleased to note that our event this evening is co-sponsored by the UCLA Center for Near Eastern Studies, the UCLA Center for European and Russian Studies, the UCLA Richard Hovhannissian Endowed Chair in Modern Armenian History, the UCLA Nadakatsi Endowed Chair in Armenian Studies, the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, the Ararat Museum, and the American University of Armenia General Education Program. We are grateful for the support of all of our co-sponsors. And on behalf of the UCLA co-sponsors of our event, I would like to acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the indigenous Gabrielino Tongva peoples. It is a privilege for our institution to acknowledge the history of the land on which we are established. Before we begin with our program and introduction of our speaker, let me just mention a few of our usual procedural items. First, let me note that this event is being recorded for future viewing on our UCLA Promise Armenian Institute YouTube channel. And second, for those of you in the audience here, when the talk is concluded, please feel free to raise your hand and ask questions. For those of you who are watching via the Zoom webinar platform, if you have a question, please click on the Q&A window button on your screen and type in your question. In all cases, please be sure to be as succinct and clear in your question as possible. And for those on Zoom, in the unlikely event that the Zoom webinar drops for any reason, please just connect right back to the same link that you were given, and you should be back in our Zoom session. So now I will be delighted to introduce Professor Sebu Aslanyan of UCLA's Department of History. Dr. Aslanyan is the director of the Armenian Studies Center within the UCLA Promise Armenian Institute and has been the holder of the Richard Hovhannissian Endowed Chair in Modern Armenian History since 2012. He is also one of the several UCLA faculty members who have been interacting with Dr. Gevorgyan during his Fulbright stay. So, Sebu, I will now turn the event over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anne, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, Gevorg, for being here, and thank you all for also joining us at this event. So, Zohrab Gevorgyan is a historian, medievalist, education specialist, and a history teaching expert with more than 15 years of pedagogical experience. He has taught at the Ayb School in Yerevan, Mkhitaryan School, as well as Yerevan State University of Economics and Yerevan State University in general. He has worked as a teacher support specialist at the education foundation known as Teach for Armenia, a very worthwhile cause, and is an adjunct lecturer, as Dr. Karagosian mentioned, at the American University of Armenia. For many years, Dr. Gevorgyan has been working as a senior researcher at the Institute of History and the National Academy of Sciences in the Republic of Armenia. He is the author of one monograph, The Armenian State of Cilicia in the Mediterranean Trade System, 13th to 14th century. And I happen to have a copy of it thanks to Dr. Gevorgyan, and I'm really appreciative of that. So he is, in addition, a co-author on a book called The Book of Teaching History, Why and How, and published in Yerevan in 2020, as well as the author of more than 30 separate scholarly articles in various journals, and mostly focusing on Cilician Armenia and specialization of medieval kingdom of Cilician Armenia and its commercial relations, Mediterranean trade. He's also worked on women's history, history of everyday life, and so forth. Dr. Gevorgyan is currently a visiting Fulbright scholar at the Promise Armenian Institute, and we're very happy to host him, to have him here, and we're looking forward for the lecture. So thank you, Gevorg. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gevorgyan.
Thank you, Seppo. Thank you, Anne. Thank you all for this warm hospitality which you just had and have towards me at UCLA. It's very, very impressive for me and very warm. Here. Okay. So I'll try to be more emphasizing on main issues which I want to present, because information is huge, and it has more than approximately 300 years history, and to accomplish it in just 45 and 1 hour, minutes and 1 hour is very hard. So why I call this report medieval knowledge in medieval times? Because every time when I come to every lesson, university at schools, really I ask myself, why do we study history? Why? What is the practical side of teaching history or knowing or studying history? Because sometimes we have a challenge. Yeah, we remember, we know, we read about history, but why? So this question may be somehow rhetoric, but we have to ask it. And sometimes to make teaching and studying history more measurable, to understand why we study for present, why we study history for present and future, and how we can implement the skills, historical thinking skills or historical thinking concepts in our practical life, really in our practical life, to make the history more practical and more actual for today's life. So I just before starting about Cilicia, I wanted to emphasize on today's history teaching concepts, which are very, very progressive in the world. And just two Canadian teachers who, by the way, when I participated in Los Angeles, is owing to Anne, who introduced me to Danny Diaz, who were doing trainings for Los Angeles history and geography teachers. I knew that one of the teachers, Canadian teachers, who created these concepts, Peter Seixas, before his death, even had training for Los Angeles history teachers. I was very impressed, because for 10 years, I'm studying these concepts, and this is very connected with our today's report. And among these concepts, establish historical significance, use primary source evidence, identify continuity and change, analyze cause and consequence, historical perspectives, and especially ethical dimension. Why I separated the ethical dimension? Because sometimes, yeah, we can call knowledge for medieval times, and we have the same name for today's, which we understand what is knowledge. Yeah, sometimes we have a confusion. What is the capacity of knowledge for medieval times? Children who went to different schools and they had different understanding about knowledge, but we call with the same word. We say knowledge to something which has the same name but different context, different historical times. And this is maybe the main challenge for history, especially when we have very fast technological changes and we have very fast transformation, what we call knowledge, and particularly historical knowledge. And that's why I emphasized on ethical dimension, that we have to be very careful when we talk about understandings, concepts, different things of different times. And that's why I emphasized on this before starting my main part of the report. So some introduction about Cilicia. The territory of Cilicia until now is one of the richest territories in the world. In these territories, you can have 2 harvests in 1 year. So from our agricultural perspective, from different other perspectives of economy, developing life, it's very, very prosperous territory. But what is important for Armenians? I called this process when Armenians came to Cilicia symbolically from the mountains to the sea. Sometimes we pay attention more on destination when Armenians already came to Cilicia. But we have to be very careful, and we have to understand the process. How an Armenian came from Artsakh to Cilicia. Just imagine, like Prince Oshin, who lived in Artsakh, in the village Mayratsjur, came with his servants, with all wealth, and they passed thousands and thousands of kilometers, reaching to the Mediterranean Sea, close to the Mediterranean. So one of the I found in one of the very famous French historian Jacques Le Goff part when he uses literature like Tristan and Isolde, when he describes and he just tried to understand the perceptions, how Tristan felt and what were Tristan's impressions or feelings or emotions when he landed in the Cornwall, and he saw different landscape, and the same, just maybe the same, approximately the same understanding I try to understand or try to study in the case of Armenians who came to Cilicia, because this process was not only just a demographic of different impressions, adaptation to new reality, because Armenians who lived in mountains, in valleys, in different landscape came to close to the Mediterranean Sea. So that is the first step and first emotional moment what we have to take before starting to understand the history of Cilicia. So Mediterranean Sea is main component of Cilicia, which changes whole environment for Armenians who came from mountains to different environment, to different landscape, which accelerated the communications, because like it's different when when Armenians lived in mountainous Armenian highland, and after when they came to the sea, when the communications, sea trade, and different other ways of communications. So let's keep on and understand with what kind of information we have. I tried to just bring some 3-4 sources, symbolic sources, which can make picturesque and more deep, to make perceptions more deep, to understand what was going on in Mediterranean Sea in 13th and 14th century. I brought different sources connected with political, economical, cultural, and religious contents. The first is, maybe I want to show you a catalog map, photograph of Abraham Gresque's map from his atlas, where you can see how precisely he just created this map. You can see here Mediterranean Sea, different parts of Mediterranean, Italy, Spain, today's Italy. In that way, in those times, there were Venetian Republic, Genoese Republic, different other states. But it was the time of, when they didn't have so many skills in cartography, but they did excellent map, in my opinion. And here I just noticed a frame which just yeah. So Alicia, you can see here in Zoom version where there is Cilician, different other names of peace in, nor in Abraham Gresque's map, nor in different other maps when other state or other country can be separated and bordered with this frame, or I call it sometimes mysterious arc. So why Abraham Gresque? I asked myself as historian, why Abraham Gresque and other cartographers, medieval cartographers like Angelina Dussel, separated Cilicia with this frame. You can see here that no other country are separated with this frame. So we can have different explanations and different interpretations, but I try to understand what can it show us and what kind of interpretations we can have using other sources, which can maybe explain this frame or give some base to understand why Abraham Gresque had some just don't know what the logic to separate Cilicia from other countries. So I try to understand this using different other sources. First I can bring, this is Marco Polo's source. You know that Marco Polo went to, he was Venetian diplomat, or just who was sent to Beijing. In that time, Beijing was the capital city of Mongol Empire. And in his way, Marco Polo visited Armenia, and he met Armenian king. He just described it how met king. This is Levon II, the son of how Marco Polo met the king. King just gave him a sheep for his further journey. And here you see the family of the king Levon, and sometimes we can just imagine how Marco Polo met the family of the king, and etc., etc. So how Marco Polo describes, just want to bring some words, some parts of Marco Polo's source in Italian, by the way, how he just describes Cilician Armenia, and we can understand it also the feelings and perceptions from the rose of Marco Polo's this short part. He says, "Sappiate che vanno due Armenia, l'una maggiore, l'altra minore." Like Cilician Armenia is never called just Cilician Armenia in the source. It is called or just Armenia or Little Armenia, Piccola Armenia, like Marco Polo, or Armenia Minore. He says, "E sovrano un re che buona giustizia mantiene obbedisce al trattato." They have a king who has justice and just obeys to Tartars. But for that, when I connect the map of Abraham Gresk and other cartographs, is very special. The last part of Marco Polo's source, when he says, "E quelli tutti," at the end of this passage, "e quelli tutti che vogliono inoltrarsi fra terra prendono via da questa città." When he describes the main port of Cilician Armenia, Laiazzo or Ayas, how we call it, he says that Venetians, Genoese come there and trade there. There are so many goods there, precious goods, etc., etc. And he says literally, everyone, e quelli tutti, who want to penetrate to the terra, saying terra is Asia, just continent, prendono via da questa città, must pass through this city. Everyone. So this is key moment when we understand that this is very special time period for Cilician Armenia. When Marco Polo came to Cilicia, it was 1270s, the beginning of 1270s, and that was the time when really the commercial relations and trade agreements with Genoa, with Venice, then Catalonian cities were very intensive, and that's why Marco Polo says these words. And sometimes we can connect the maps, the sources, and have interpretations why Abraham Gresk or the other cartographers just separated Cilicia from other countries. Not exact nor absolute opinions, but just interpretations when we connect all these sources. But I brought only Marco Polo. Marco Polo is very symbolic for those times. And let's keep on and to see what kind of sources I separated. This is an example of trade agreements between Cilician Armenia and European, West European countries. This is a two-language bilingual commercial contract. You see Armenian and the Latin. This is the commercial agreement with Sicilian Kingdom of 1331. There were two Sicilian kingdoms, by the way. But we have all trade agreements which are published. This is the original, which is kept in Italian. I don't remember, it's in Venetian archives but many thousands of archival documents are preserved in Italian archives in Genoa, in Venice, in Vatican, in Spain, in Segovia. Huge quantity of archives, and this is a result of destroying of main archives of Cilicia because of invasion of Mamluks, because of conquering of Cilicia by Mamluks. All Cilician royal archive was destroyed, and fortunately, all these documents were before transported to Italy, to different other European cities, and owing to it, all these copies were preserved until now. So what we have else? I separated commercial, one mostly commercial source, one political source, and among political sources, which I call political, just relatively, is the source of Venetian politician and author of 14th century, Marino Sanuto Torcello the Elder. Actually, he wrote a secret book of a new crusade in 14th century. You know that there were tense geopolitical relations between France, England in that time, and eventually brought to 100-year war. And that's why new crusade was utopia for those times. But anyway, Marino Sanuto just who tried to uh, develop or to develop Venetian presence in Eastern Mediterranean. He wrote a book. He called it just a book, Liber Secretorium. The book was called itself like secret book of secrets of faithful of cross, or like Liber Secretorium Fidelium Crucis. That was a secret book which he gave to Roman Pope. In that time, Pope's residence was in Avignon. It was another Christian, not in Rome. So that book was about organizing of new crusade, which where Marino Sanuto gave special importance for Cilician Armenia. And here he talks about Cilician Armenia, describing Cilician Armenia in very, very symbolic way. What he says: and it is proper to have respect with your most pious piety. The first reader of this book was Roman Pope, and it was addressed to Roman Pope. And it is proper to have respect with your most pious piety to the kingdom of your faithful Armenians, because it lies in the jaws of four beasts. He says that Cilician Armenia was surrounded like four beasts. He symbolically describes the enemies like beasts. On one side below ground, it has a lion, namely the Tatars, to whom the king of Armenia pays a huge tribute. On another side, it has a panther, namely the Sultan, who daily ravages the Christians and the kingdom. On the third side, there is a wolf, namely the Turks, who destroy the lordship and the kingdom. On the fourth side, it has the serpent, namely the corsairs, like pirates of the Mediterranean, who daily gnaw the bones of the Christian Armenia. So these are about not only about just describing Armenia in a symbolical way, but also it can serve to understand how Europeans perceived Cilician Armenia, how they perceived the frontiers of Christian world. Because these are different times. We have different perceptions about Europe, about today's cultural borders, but medieval times are different, and they have different perceptions about particularly Cilician Armenia. And the next source, which I brought after Marco Polo, after Marino Sanuto Torcello, is Giovanni Boccaccio, from cultural content, which I mentioned at first. Why Giovanni Boccaccio? He lived in those times. And Giovanni Boccaccio actually is one of the three main, maybe, founders of early Renaissance. Yeah, with Petrarca, with Dante. And in Decameron, Giovanni Boccaccio mentions many times about Cilician Armenia, about Armenia. And even just one part of his stories he dedicated to an Armenian who was kidnapped from the shores of Cilician Armenia. His name was Pietro, and he had different other names, Teodoro. He was kidnapped and he was brought to Sicily. He was by pirates, and he was sold as a slave. And this story is very beautiful. And from this story, we can understand, we can study, we can use these kind of stories to perceive how Europeans or Italians or different other cultural figures, not only political figures, which had tense political relations with Cilician king, but not only political figures, but also cultural prominent figures, and also merchants, different common people were aware about Cilicia. That is the main moment, and how they were aware. Because if Boccaccio writes about Cilicia living in Florence. But first of all, he had to know about Cilicia. First of all, how he knew about Cilicia. That is the main point. So my advice to read again Decameron, and this part is very, very interesting and very beautiful. Main questions. So, how did different professions move from the west to the east of the Mediterranean Sea, from Barcelona to Cyprus and Cilician, Armenia, and vice versa? And how did their spatial temporal perceptions and mutual awareness change? And how did technology skills circulate with the movement of people? So after these symbolic and picturesque source, I want to come to microhistory, from general to micro, how people live, how people transported all this information, and owing to which Giovanni or Marco Polo knew about Cilicia before coming Cilicia. About paper and documentation. This is the era of paper, really paper. Took advantage on communications and documentation. That's first starting, not starting, but developing part of paper era when people had production of paper increased and people used paper for documentation for other purposes. And it's not coincidence that the first banks of Italy, Siena, especially in the city of Siena, in Florence, started especially in 12th and 13th century. And after that, also Medici's and others in 15th century. So I brought again one Armenian source of Sambar de Constable. He, by the way, was the brother of Hetum, the king Hetum, and a military minister of Armenia. And he says this is very, very common point from law code of Cilicia, which was actually state code of the country. He says, it's about overall, it's about selling and purchase of meals and other things. And he says, if someone makes the purchase and sale through witnesses and confirms it with paper, neither buyer nor the seller can regret it. So if you hasate tchtov, he says, if you confirm it with the paper, you cannot regret it. So this was a key point when Sambat Constable just emphasizes on documentation. And I brought just one example when we have a real symbolic. It's not only about like material paper. It's about document. It could be done with parchment or other, but they could not use like only parchment for document or just the common sale of meals or other things. They had to use paper actually. So about different parts of this process. I want to bring Francesco Balducci Pegolotti's source, La Pratica della Mercatura. Francesco Balducci Pegolotti was a bank agent. There was a bank, biggest bank of Europe of that time. It was called Bardi. And Francesco Balducci was the agent of Bardi Bank. He came to Cilicia. He had agreement with Cilicia, and he wrote many things about Cilicia. Very, very common everyday life things, not usual historical things that we have in our understanding about history. And he just listed different kinds of Armenian goods, like uve paso de Armenia. It's Armenian raisin. But why I brought this example? If a European knew about a product which was produced in Armenia, it is also, again, also about informational exchange. Because if an Armenian good comes to Italy and becomes known as Armenian, like resin, like cotton, exchange of information. And Pegolotti also mentioned about huge exchange of precious metals through Cilician Armenia. He says that different kinds of silver were brought to Cilicia to use it in the royal mint to cast different kinds of Armenian coins. Here he mentions in Italian, and he mentions about Venetian silver, Genoese silver, Tornesi Grossi, which is a French, Bohemini. Bohemini is Czech today. Was the silver which was pre-Bohemia, it's Bohemia, yeah. So Cilician Armenia was also axis of exchange of precious metals, by the way, which one of the scholars also studied, Stafford. And all this information, all these goods were transported by galleys, not two big ships, by people, by galleys. All those documents which are brought to Europe were transported by galleys, especially by galleys. We have to understand this. They were very, very, comparing today's ships, they were very, very small. So it's again another component to understand the exchange of information in Mediterranean. So Genoese and Venetian notarial acts. These are main sources for me when I understand the real everyday life, the feelings of people who lived in Cilician Armenia. Armenians who lived side by side with Genoese, with Venetians, with Jews, Arabs. That was really cosmopolitan environment. That was a key point where we have to understand that that was some different society and new society for Armenian reality. And these notarial agents who lived in Layatso, not only, there were thousands of notarial agents all over Mediterranean, in Black Sea, Venetian and Genoese colonies. And I brought original photocopies of notarial acts, which were drawn up in Layatso. Every little contract was documented. Every little contract concerning with the sale of pepper, with the sale of ginger, different contracts. And I just listed some surnames who lived in Cilician Armenia, who visited Cilician Armenia. And we knew that merchants came to Cilician Armenia. That was not so. Because I compared the surnames of people who are registered in these notarial acts drawn up in Ayas, in Layatso, with the noble families of Genoa of that time. And I had many coincidences with the same families of Genoa, noble families, Grimaldi, Tartaro, De Nigro, Doria, Lercari. So to Cilicia came not only common people, merchants, other social strata, but also noble. And I brought different examples of published notarial acts when we have examples of marriages with natives and permanent residents in Cilicia, with Armenian women, Italians, and I say Italian, just Genoese and Venetian, because in that time we can say just Italian in yeah. So this is a very common testament of Ianuino de Demo, who lived in Cilicia, and he had to die soon before leaving this document, and he just gave all his wealth to his wife. And he says also a very interesting moment, which is very interesting from the point of view of microhistory. And I just found this little part. Here is written that Alicia's dowry is written in Armenian. So in this document, it's written, Dotali in literis Armenis. So sometimes we can just neglect this kind of little expressions, but these are very interesting and very important. So it means that Alice most probably she was not noble woman. Most probably. So why I mention it? Because being common woman living in Cilicia, she could document her dowry. So women living in Cilicia in 13th century could document her dowry, which was emphasis of her social status, by the way, which is just depicted in this source when it is mentioned here that Alice's dowry is in Armenian, and this dowry belongs to Alice. So this is about division of matrimonial property. So what else? Here, another example of marriage, another example of marriages between Armenian women and Italian Genoese and Venetian merchants. And they came to Cilician Armenia temporarily, but also lived there permanently. So it's not only about saying facts, but it's about interchange of different cultures. Because marriage is the ideal way to synthesize different cultures. So it was maybe 150 years, starting from the first agreement of Levon I, first agreements with Genoa and Venice. And so Genoese, Venetians, Pisans, Florentines came to Cilician Armenia for 150 years approximately, when eventually Cilician Armenia was destroyed. So starting from 1201. So all these people lived in Cilician Armenia, had marriages. There was intensive interchange of cultures, habits, kitchens, different kinds of everyday life things, which are also in exchange of information. And I brought the main part of my day's report. This is maybe culmination part. When I listed from those notarial acts, only from 3 years of notarial acts, 1274, 1277, 1279, which are preserved, by the way, in Genoa until now. And by the way, Marco Polo visited Cilician Armenia 3 years before 1274. He visited in 1271. And I listed from all these notarial acts professions, different professions which people had in Cilician Armenia, Genoese and Venetians. And just imagine here how many professions they had. Notaries. I listed 20 notaries, 20 notarial agents who I can say they all lived in Cilician Armenia. Maybe they came here temporarily. But in those acts which were drawn up in Ayas, they are mentioned. 20 notaries. This is a huge quantity for medieval cities. Secretaries, cancelarios, scribes, scribas, commercial intermediaries, bankers. The term is the same, bancarios, or bancarios, and more teachers. I found 7 names, different names of Magister, Doctor Grammatice. So they were teachers of grammar, lived in Cilician Armenia. More, one of them, I will show, lived in the court of the king of Cilician Armenia. Maybe he talks his family, Latin, or I don't know. We can just have interpretation. Doctors. There were 2 different professions. Doctors, Magister Medicus, 2 doctors, Italian doctors who lived in the community in the Genoese community. I bring only this example based on Genoese notarial acts, not counting Venetian notarial acts. And also pharmacists. So we have 2 different professions: doctors, Magister Medicus, 2 doctors, and pharmacists, apothecary or spice dealers. They were called specialius. 3 apothecaries. So imagine those people came to Cilician Armenia with their knowledge, with their skills, with their capacity, and they interacted with with people of Cilician Armenia. This is bright example how the knowledge was interchanged in the Mediterranean. The same we can say about Cyprus, the same we can say about Crete, about Black Sea, Phoenician and Genoese communities in Crimea, and different other places. And more, Barbarius, 5 barbers. Like maybe for us, it's very just common information. Yeah, 5 barbers came to Cilicia, Italian barbers came to Cilicia to work. But how they cut, how they had different fashion, it's also a matter of history. Because Armenians who lived in, who were looking at Genoese who had different haircut, it's also a matter of history, a moment of history, to understand how in medieval times information was circulating. And Cilician Armenia is a bright example because, like Michael Polo says, all the people who wanted to penetrate to Terra had to pass through this city. That was great environment. So again and again, the carpenters, blacksmiths, master of knives and swords, thread spinners, cloth makers, furriers, peliparius, tailors, you see here, 6 tailors. So all these are skills, not only people. Every person had different skills, and most probably because they lived side by side with Armenians. They had their own quarters in Cilician Armenia granted by the king, which was proved by all trade agreements. But anyway, these communities were not ghettos. They had close relations with Armenians, and all these are proved by sources. Wool shearers, shoemakers, bakers, shopkeepers, etc., etc., etc. So, 7 persons who, like Genoese Filippo Soldano, a grammar teacher, who is mentioned as a teacher who lived in the court of Cilician Armenia. It is in published notarial legends, Balletto, Notari Genovesi in Oltre Mare. It's a very interesting publication. By the way, the author herself sent me this publication. And Guillermos Magister Cancellarius Domini Regis Armeni. So these kind of examples, when we have doctors, when we have grammar teachers living in Armenian courts, shows that they were not living just like ghettos. They were intensive interactions, commercial and not only commercial interactions with Armenians who lived with Armenian population. And those interactions were the result of those interactions could be exchange of information, exchange of skills, exchange of knowledge, which they had. And by the way, Armenian in the 13th century, we have already mentioned witnesses about Armenian community in Venice. That was not only Cilician Armenia, but also Armenian lived in Venice. And Erwan Alishan says about it based on archival material, and Henri Bresque and different other scholars who studied Armenian communities of Venice starting from even early medieval times. So these are examples of different kinds of contracts which are drawn up in Vaiatso. Just I can bring one example of these contracts and finish after all. Like we have here example of medico who involved in a commercial contract. Like, what is it about? Giovanni di Rapallo de Risecco. Risecco was an Italian city, maybe in a neighborhood of Genoa. Riceve in accomodazione al quarto del profitto. This is pure commercial contract. A profitto dell'Andolfo Medico. So Giovanni di Rapallo had commercial contract the contract was called accommodazione. It's very famous kind of contract. Maybe one of the main institutional contracts of Mediterranean Sea. not only Mediterranean Sea, especially. And they had a contract to use 600 Armenian new drams, which was main coin. We have in our museums Armenian coins. You can just see those coins. They were silver, mainly silver coins. So to use 600 Armenian drams to portare, negoziare, cisnarinus, so to go to have commercial activity in different parts. It could be Barcelona, it could be Venice, it could be different cities of Mediterranean. So they took the money, they went to those cities, they had some commercial activity, and they came back to Cilician Armenia. It's another part of my study, and I don't want to stop by these questions. Some different other examples when we can find huge quantity of circulation of knowledge. This is about like I brought the example of far western Mediterranean city, Narbonne, and eastern Mediterranean Cilician Armenia. In Narbonne lived where there was a huge Jewish community who lived in Narbonne. They had very powerful commercial presence in Narbonne. And I found in some notarial acts drawn up in Famagusta in Cyprus and also in Cilicia, when Narbonne merchants of Jewish origin had commercial activity even with Armenian king. So here you see that Fernando Faxit and other like Narbonne people had commercial activity with the king of Cilician Armenia, the son of the king who just admitted Marco Polo. It was Hetun II, and here is written that like they had a commercial contract which worth 2,797 Armenian new drams, and these drams sometimes were called takolinis from the word takfolin, which is from the word king, Armenian king, Takolini. Italians just changed the name in Italian pronunciation. Like if it's Takfolin, they called it Takolini. Like, so Lorenzo de Usayuta on behalf of the king of Cilician Armenia. So this is another example when we have commercial activities between even noble people of different professions. And why I bring this multidimensional information, because this thousands of notarial acts, even not published yet. All these documents contain huge quantity of medieval knowledge, which can change our attitude towards history. Because sometimes we have just maybe misinterpretation about medieval times. We call medieval times mostly dark, because we have some perception about dark ages, about Black Death, etc., etc. But as a medievalist, these were very bright times. Maybe the times when the Renaissance was taking its start points in 14th century, and this is not secret that prayer process which started from Crusades and lasted until 14th century was the process of intensive interchange of information throughout Mediterranean. And it brought 5th century when in Florence
People are still online, just yeah, there's just listening.
So, laws and codes and trial scenes about, I want to talk about some things about Machitar Gosh and some about Constable, but all this is about another content about about laws, about law codes, how they were created. They were not created only based on internal Armenian traditions, legal traditions. The only fact that, like Sambat Constable translated the Assizes of Antioch, which was main law code for one of the main law codes of Crusader states, says that Sambat Constable used not only Mechitar Gosh or the Book of Canons, which is preserved until now because the old French version is not preserved. So this is another example, interchange of information from the legislative point of view. Teachers, students, how this informational exchange changed. The content of state codes, I just brought a symbolic example how it was regulated the relations between teachers and students in Sambat's law code and Mechitar Gosh's law code. This is about when teacher just strikes his pupil, his student, and how it was regulated. It's another interesting point which we have to study deeply to understand the interchange and creation of law codes, however the processes were going on in Cilician Armenia in this point of view. So after all, what we have? Goods, professions, skills, technologies, different cultures, financial circulation, financial literacy, because we mentioned about banks, different kinds of financial activities in circulation of money. You know that Cilician coins were found in the territory of Ukraine by archaeologists. It's another point. So we have all the processes going on in Mediterranean Sea. And that was the example of Cilician Armenia based on sources which were created in Cilician Armenia. And the Armenians lived side by side all these processes. This is huge. It brings opportunity to go deep and to study all these point by point. Because sometimes I say that every point requires one study, one maybe article or one monograph. I tried to present you just in short, even in short, because the information was huge, and the main goal is to understand the change between the different historical times and to change, maybe sometimes to change or to revise our understanding about history. So, thank you.
Any question?
I can offer a question. So very interesting talk. Thank you so much. You spoke about a lot of the intermarriage between the Italians or Genoans and the Cilician Armenians. Can you tell us, I mean, was there assimilation then of the Armenians into the Italian culture, or was it the reverse? Did they stay in Cilician Armenia, or was that known?
It's a very delicate question. Thank you for a great question. And it's a very delicate question because everything which we prove, we have to prove based on sources. And if we have example of marriages and we have commercial contracts or different other contracts which contain such information, we can just study from different points. Like me, I studied from the point of division of matrimonial property. And I tried to understand. They were followed by the laws of the Genoese community. They were administered by Genoese laws, or they were under the law system of Cilician Armenia. So this is one example how we can answer your question from the point of view of laws. But we can study also from different other points, from cultural synthesis, which was more dominant in Cilician Armenia. It depended on different other, even personal circumstances. Because if we have the fact that the property of women who lived in with Genoese was proved by document of dowry, it's an example where the status of women is mentioned, because it's some kind a protection of women rights, like today's term. Otherwise, this expression wouldn't be mentioned in this document. The totali literis Armenis, that the dowry of Alice is written in Armenian. Maybe it's some words, but these are interesting words. So your question needs further study.
May I just follow-up question on hers? Have you ever considered a little more distant discipline, which is the DNA studies and genetics? To cross, we have, anecdotal examples of people from Aintab, Armenians who are related to other people of southern Italy, and their common ancestor is in the 12th century, more or less. So it's most probably a Cilician connection. So, but no one has done dedicated research of this or whatever data may exist now. Every day there's more and more. So maybe we might complement all these studies with some of those.
So changes could be faster than we think. Like when Armenian just immigrated from Cilician Armenia to Venice, we have to study different archives of Venice. How even their names were changed. Like in 17th century and 18th century, we have examples when Hovannes became Giovanni, yeah, or Noratonian became, Casanova here. So these are examples how we can follow your question. How transformations were in process, starting even from their names. So people believed in Cilician Armenia. We have to understand from different points, but from different sources. But it's very hard to follow and to say as a historian based on facts, on sources. We can have interpretations.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions that dovetail on Anne's question and Habub's as well. The first one, at least. The first question is, first of all, I'm sorry, I should thank you for the wonderful lecture and the very rich, detailed discussion of the notarial records. Those are incredibly important for the study of Cilician Armenia and cross-cultural exchange. So the first question I have has to do with the level of interaction, the intensity of interaction between the Mediterranean merchants and local Armenians. And by this, what I mean to say is that obviously there was interaction and cross-cultural encounters. These communities had their bases in Cilicia and Ayas or Sis. But I don't believe, that's my impression, you should correct me if you can, I don't believe the interactions were on the level of ordinary people. I think more than likely it's a case of cultural encounter, interaction, marriage, commercial contracts, knowledge transfers, and so on, that are limited to the elite level. And because of this, I think I say this because I assume that the European merchants in Cilicia were given their own special places to live in. I don't think they lived and interacted with ordinary people. I think they lived in places called fondacos or fondaki, which is obviously an Italian term that comes from the Arabic funduk, which is itself derivative of the Greek pandokion, which is of course related to the Armenian pandok or hotel. So these were places where merchants had their place of residence. They didn't always interact with the ordinary people. They interacted with other merchants and other elites, or in the court. So I'm wondering, first of all, if you can tell me for sure if the Genoese and the Venetians had their own fondacos. In what they were called in Armenian at the time, were they called pantokyon, or something else? And secondly, also related to this, the question of the Komenda contract. I specialize on the Komenda from my first book, so I know a little bit about it. And I know it goes back to the Mediterranean in the Crusader period, but it's probably of Arabic origin as well, and the Armenians used it. So my question is, in terms of the European version of the Komenda, which is called Komenda or something, there were a couple of terms. Colleganza, not raccomandazione, commendatore commenda. Not raccomandazione is a very different thing.
Yeah.
But they're called these things, and I'm wondering whether if you have come across anything in the archives that gives us the name of the Komenda contract in Armenian. And I think this is I'll be really fascinated to know. I don't know if there is an Armenian name at this time. And if there is, perhaps it's Ngerak here, which is the way it was for Julfa 500 years later. But if you could shed light on it.
Yeah. Everything, again, as historian, everything what I want to say, I want to base on facts, on sources. Why I think that there were, if I say intensive, we can just we have perceptions for today's intensiveness, but intensive in medieval reality. If they didn't interact with Armenian people who just produced different kinds of agricultural productions or other productions of artisans, how they solve it. So I think the interaction was in the market. The main place of it was the market. The markets of Ayas, markets of Mamestia, or Masis, or Korikos, but the main port is Ayas, actually. So, very everyday life interactions. Everyday life, where they bought something, or they sold something, or they interacted with people who live neighborhood. It's about this. I think there was interaction. I can't say these were too intensive. After all, they had their internal life in Genoese or Venetian communities, because there was another question, because Genoese and Venetians compete with each other. They had even wars between each other. That's one of the main points. They had sea battle in the shores of Ayas in 1294, about which there are different sources. So, about Fondaco. In Latin sources, it is called like Fondaco. But in Armenian sources, maybe I was not too careful to find it in Armenian source, the version of Fondaco in Armenian source. I'll try to do it further. There are mentions about the different buildings, like Magazenum, or which was the storage for goods, other things, bathrooms, or baths, or other things which are mentioned in commercial contracts between Armenians and the Armenian king, or Venetian doge, or someone else. And about Komenda. I just studied these contracts in Cilician context. I found there are different names, different kinds of contract, which was based on division of profit. 2 and 3, or 1 and 4. There were two sides, commendator and tractator. And the other side was investor, and the second side was the merchant who took the money and traded it in the Mediterranean or in Black Sea, another region. It was called cambio, even. Some commercial transactions were called cambios, but I think they are separate from Komenda. So, colleganza, by the way. But again, in Armenian sources, as Armenian sources are maybe didn't have some habit or culture of writing history, they didn't describe such things. Even Sambat Constable, who had to write like coexistence, some laws concerning coexistence between Armenians and Genoese and Venetians, he didn't mention about these things. He mentions about Armenians and other nations, some regulations in laws. But anyway, this kind of information I didn't find, and I'm even sure that we cannot find like the Armenian version of Komenda. If I can, even if I didn't find it, maybe I can find it in other sources, but I'm not sure right now. So
It might be mentioned in the Aziz, I think, but I'm not sure.
Like as Assizes of Antioch is not preserved, we can maybe look in Assizes of Jerusalem. I don't know. But in Assizes of Jerusalem, it can be mentioned again as Komenda, and how we can know about it is the same. How we can know about Armenian version, the word of Komenda. That's the question.
Yes, so one additional note to what you were saying. In Venice, the Armenian presence in Venice goes back to 1255 approximately, and it's connected to your lecture because the person who gave that house to the Armenians, the Ospitio degli Fondaco dei Armeni or degli Armeni, was a doge of Venice. He became a doge later on. He was related to he was from an elite family. Marco Ziani was his name.
Exactly.
And the house that he gave, which is now the Armenian church in Venice, not on the island, but in the mainland, that goes back to Marco Ziani's time as a merchant in Cilicia. He was apparently treated so well that he made an oath to leave them a portion of his belongings in Venice, and he did so.
The questions which you ask require further study, because until now, maybe the most studied commercial web, I can say, it's Jewish commercial, I can say, activity in Mediterranean, and we know that they had connections between Indian Sea through Narbonne, which I mentioned.
Mm.
Maybe we have to go deep and to study all commercial, not only commercial, but Armenian communities of Mediterranean Sea, especially in Italy, in Venice, in Genoa, and to understand, did they have interactions with Cilician Armenia after when they arrived to Venice? Because it's hard question. It's very hard question because they needed to have ships or to use Venetian ships, and they were very limited. I know from Venetian sources were mentioned ships which were coming to Cyprus and Cilicia, 8 or 10 in a year. And they were bringing only very, very precious goods, especially galleys. And I'm not talking about cars and other different ships which were transporting wheat or other cheaper material. But galleys were transporting silver, more precious things, silk, spices, by the way. So to understand those times, we have to just imagine that if you had like some pounds of saffron, and you like could transport this saffron from Cilicia or other city of the east to Venice, you could buy maybe even a house with some pounds of saffron. That was unique for Middle Ages because of limited transportation and limited communication environment. Though in medieval times it was fast for them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now do we have questions in Zoom chat? Yeah, the question is, we call Cilicia just in English, the Cilicia. You know, we have also the same for Sicily. Like in Old Latin, it is called Sicilia, but then in the Middle Latin, it is called Sicilia. Like Cilicia, Cilicia is English, maybe pronunciation. Yeah, in Armenian we call Cilicia, but I repeat that Cilician Hayastan, like Cilician Armenia, is not mentioned in sources. In the sources, it's mentioned just Armenia, just Armenia. maybe this is the only place where Marco Polo just separates Grande Armenia and Armenia Minore, Maggiore Armenia, because he wanted to see the Mount of Ararat, because it's biblical mount, and that's why he continued his journey to Beijing, and he passed also through Armenia, by the way. It was Silk Road in that time. The road coming from Tabriz, from Iran, to Lyatso. It was main branches, one of the main branches of Silk Road. And another question. Intermarriages in medieval times is reflected nowadays when people in Western Europe undergo genetic testing and obtaining their DNA profile. Find out they have Armenian DNA. These people now come to visit the Republic and learn Armenian folklore and dances. They come to visit me on the top of our mountain. Thank you for this question. You know, my friend just tried to send to test his DNA. I say DNA doesn't show the nationality. It doesn't say you are Armenian or something. It just shows a geographical area from where, maybe approximately from where came your DNA. That's why, it's a very hard question. It's a very hard question.
Yeah, I want to insist with, because I guess there's a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
That the area or the origin, which is totally kind of statistical thing, I don't find that. But when you have a match, a DNA match, with a supposed, common ancestor in a certain area. So one person is in, let's say, Aintab or Ayash or wherever, or Aleppo, and the other person is a certain city of Italy, and the common ancestor is in the 12th century. That says something, and that is scientific. So that is something worth pursuing, but obviously it's not your specialty. But it will be interesting to kind of cross paths with other specialists.
Sure. If we study this from the perspective of migration, demographies, and different other processes in 12th, 13th century, but it's a matter of different discipline, I think, because, cooperating with historians, by the way, if you find someone who immigrated from Cilician or Armenia, like to Venice, it could be done only by ships. And those ships belonged or to pirates or Venetians or Genoese. And actually, they moved by these ships. Thank you.
Well, one thing, picking up on Hagop's question or comment, one thing that they can determine with a good deal of accuracy are genetic diseases, for example. And you may be familiar in Yerevan, they call a disease that is not uncommon among Armenians, although it's a rare disease, the Armenian disease, but it's actually, its formal name is familial Mediterranean fever. And it is associated with individuals who are generally, but after hundreds, if not thousands of years, with ancestors from the region of the Mediterranean. Armenians have one of the highest proportions of this disease. So do Sephardic Jews. So do Italians, not so much, but they even have detected, this disease, and it's a rare gene mutation in people who live in Great Britain, Japan, for example.
Yeah.
So you can't, determine which generation it was, where the ancestor came from, but it was a common ancestor, and very likely you could determine, these connections. And you might think about, and I don't know about you in particular, but disease prevalence, what kinds of diseases are actually documented, because this is one that has not been understood until truly around in the 1970s, 60s, and 70s. But now there are, gene mutations. You can determine actually.
And you have very, very deep intuition, because my second study concerns diseases which are mentioned in Armenian sources, like in Sambat. There are different kinds of diseases, and that's why I brought the only source which I have in my presentation is, again, Marco Polo, when he says, "Anzi il clima vi mantiene la malattia." Here, the climate, he says about some some kind of disease. I don't know. Maladie, it's in French, in Italian, it's maladie. It's about diseases. But what kind of disease? We don't know. It's about environmental history. It's a very progressive part of our history. And that's why my second study, after when I tried to publish my present study, which I dedicated to violence, mentions about violence in Armenia, not only in Armenian sources, in Cilician Armenia, in Sambat's code, in Khitar code, how it is formulated, and different things. My next must be diseases. Why? Because in the process, I met so many diseases. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I understood that this is precious thing.
Yeah.
And we have to understand. The only question is for Armenian history, it's very important because mostly we don't pay attention on common things, which are not common
Right.
after all. So when I was in the conference for environmental studies, I was shocked what kind of studies they are doing. Just the quality of water, diseases. It's about really making history really humanity.
Relevant.
Yeah, about people, about how Armenians lived, how Armenians cooperate, how they just organize their life. It's about emotions, etc., etc.
Yeah.
That's why I'm gonna
Yeah.
publish it about even some diseases concerning sexual life, by the way, syphilis and others. And you
Right.
don't want to open all
Yeah.
list.
Well, you may be interested. I mean, some of you perhaps were present, but in January, we had a lecture for the Promise Armenian Institute by Dr. Wayne Brody, one of UCLA's top geneticists, who was funded by us a few years ago to do a study on the Armenian genome, but he's one of the world's experts on familial Mediterranean fever. So he spoke quite a bit about that. You might be interested. It's recorded. It's on our YouTube channel from late January, as I recall.
Okay.
So fascinating. Thank you.
I just want to add something on Popolo's line. So is it non-regione salubre, not
Yeah.
healthy region?
Yeah.
And you see that exact description about the Adana plain, and now called the Chukurova plain, in the 1890s Armenian sources, in the 1910 Armenian sources, and even now in Turkish
We have to follow.
That's such an interesting,
Right.
Regione salubre. Without doing proper study, my intuition just prompted me that this is about maybe malaria, because there were rivers and there were maybe many different places when he says it's not a regione salubre from the point of anzi il clima vi mantiene la malattia, because of climate there are some diseases. But what kind of diseases Marco Polo didn't mention?
Bubonic plague, was that ever mentioned in any of the sources?
Oh,
Since 1340s, 1350s.
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
is it
At the end of
thought,
Cilicia.
scientists believe that this gene mutation that is not uncommon in Armenian was developed, but over many centuries, if not maybe thousands of years, to combat against bubonic plague. If you have this gene mutation, you are not as likely to die from it.
Yeah,
That
we can say
also-
for sure that all these diseases were transported by people.
Yeah.
So if the communications were getting fast, the diseases also were
Right.
spreading faster.
Yeah.
And that's the main point which can say for sure. But we have to study it. We have to find sources in Europe, in different places. Again, to say about more based on sources. Because I'm very careful on these questions. Very careful.
One last question that has to do with specific words. I noticed that you had quoted someone in Armenian as well as in Latin or English. And if I'm not mistaken, I read the word Koshiman, which is Pushman, which is a Persian or Arabic loanword. Was that in the original document, Koshiman? Did they use Koshiman at that time?
Let's find it.
Yeah, right there.
It's
Poshmanel, yeah.
Poshmanel, it's a regret.
Of course I know, but
Yeah.
I'm saying that it seems like a later borrowing, Poshmanel, or maybe I don't know if it was used in Cilician Armenia. The Cilicians did not have good relations with Muslims, as you know. So I'm wondering if that's
Depends
the
on,
case.
depend. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, they participated in a lot of
Yeah.
in quite a bit of violent activity against mosques and so on. So that
Sure,
made them
sure.
a target for the Mamluks. So,
Yeah.
but the language issue, is that a quotation from the original or is that
It's
a translation
It's
into modern Armenian? So
from Java.
Poshmanel,
No,
okay, that's
no,
interesting.
It's from Java.
That's an interesting one word. Okay, thank you.
I did go. Thank you.
If there are no other questions, let's thank our.
Thank you so much.
speaker. That's it. So great. I'll just give a couple
sure.
of closing remarks. Thank you so much. Thank you, Zohrab, for a fascinating talk. Really appreciate your being here at UCLA and your sharing your knowledge with us. So let me just close our event by mentioning that there are a couple of events sponsored by our partners to the Promise Armenian Institute that are upcoming. Those of you who've been watching your emails over the last couple of hours may have noticed that there has been a postponement of one event. This is the 8th annual UCLA Undergraduate Colloquium in Armenian Studies that is coordinated by Professor Peter Cowie. This will be held in the near future, but it will not be held tomorrow, which is Friday, May 24th. Please consult our website, our social media for an alternative date for that. But as far as we know, on Saturday, June 1st, from 11 a.m. until 7 p.m. Pacific time, the UCLA Armenian Music Program and the new Promise Chair in Armenian Music, Arts, and Culture, Professor Melissa Bilal, will provide for the UCLA campus as well as the local community a day of Armenian music, arts, and culture. So this will be a day-long festival spotlighting the depth and breadth of music, arts, and cultural programs that exist at UCLA in the Armenian space. It promises to be a treat for all. So please plan to come. And again, consult our website and social media for specifics on that event. So before closing, I'd like to thank all of you for attending. Special thanks to Hasmi Bagdasaryan, our deputy director, as usual, who is running everything in the background for our event. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you at future events for our Promise Armenian Institute. So, yeah, really interesting.
I was very surprised my students came here.
Good.